everyone, I'm Democracy. You probably heard about me from your teachers, or maybe you overheard politicians talking about me on TV. Anyway, for those who are interested who I am and how I came to be, today I'll be doing a Draw My Life. I was born in ancient Greece, which was not a country in our modern sense where all Greeks lived within a single state with a single government. Instead, Greece was composed of several hundred independent cities, each with its surrounding countryside. I was fortunate to be born in the most famous city-state, the great state of Athens. In fact, it was probably the Athenians who gave me my name, Demokratia, from the Greek words demos, the people, and kratos, to rule. Among the Greek democracies, that of Athens was by far the most important. So how did the idea that led to my creation crop up, you might be thinking? In Athens, a noble named Solon laid the foundations for me and introduced a new constitution based on the ownership of property. According to this, Athenians were divided into 4 classes, with political power distributed among them. The highest offices went to those people whose land produced 730 bushels of grain, while the lowest class comprised labourers who could not hold office but who could vote in the assembly. Solon's reforms eventually broke down as the ruling classes began fighting amongst themselves, taking Athens to the brink of civil war. A new constitution was later proposed, which included the establishment of sortation, which saw citizens selected at random to fill the government positions rather than attaining them through inheritance. Eventually came the formation of a deliberative body known as the Bull, which saw 500 randomly selected people meet daily to discuss legislation, which would then be agreed by citizens at Ecclesia, the People's Assembly. While it's not flattering to say this, I must warn you, don't idolize me in my Athenian form. Thanks to me, there was a lot of ostracism in ancient Athens. If 6,000 voters were in favour, an Athenian citizen could be sent into exile for 10 years, and they often used this tactic to get rid of the powerful but perhaps unpopular citizen. That's why people have been blaming me to have caused the death of great Socrates. But ever since that, I did a lot of growing up, a lot of mentoring and counselling in Roman Republic, in Europe and the rest of the world in 20th century. So nowadays, I take the form of power that is held by elected representatives or by the people themselves. I'm liberal in most cases, meaning that I'm both representative and also liberal in the sense of adopting limited government. In place of all-encompassing scope of Athenian polis, in my liberal form I offer governance by law, rather than by people. Alongside my cousin, the rule of law, we ensure that elected rulers and citizens alike are subject to constitutions that usually include a statement of individual rights. Should the government become overbearing, citizens can use domestic and international courts to uphold these rights. The protection of civil liberties is very important to me. It's based on the understanding that there are certain things and freedoms that citizens must have and that cannot be infringed by the actions of the government. These include the right to liberty, to security, to privacy, to life, to a fair trial, as well as the freedoms of speech and expression, of assembly and association, and of press and religion. This is all well and good, but even I have difficulty deciding where the rights of one group end and those of another begin. Right now, I face 2 main challenges: democratic reversal and declining trust. Not long ago, I was really trending and popular, especially with the end of Soviet Union, with the end of military governments in Latin America, and with the democracy movements in North Africa that gave rise to Arab Spring. But most recently, I appear to have been struggling with challenges to political rights and civil liberties, even in the countries with strong democratic credentials, including the US, Great Britain, France, and Japan. Meanwhile, in many countries that were once my biggest supporters, such as China, Russia, and Turkey, there have been a reversal, and have been rejected as authoritarian leaders and political parties have become more powerful. The citizens of countries in many parts of the world have also expressed new levels of discontent with the performance of their governments and have shown less trust in their leaders while feeling more politically and economically marginalized. Many worry about the threats to political, economic, and social values they once thought they could take for granted. Those threats may be real or they might be imagined, but the result in many cases has been a rising tide of populism, as populist leaders point the fingers of blame at the political and economic elite. Well, enough about my problems. You probably want to see me in the digital age. That would bring me back to my purest form, direct democracy. My Athenian experiment proved that, in the right circumstances, my direct form was an achievable goal, yet it is hard to find in modern political systems. It exists most obviously in the form of either referendums and initiatives. The rise of the internet has brought the fastest and most widespread changes, and there has been some talk about the possibilities of a direct electronic version of myself, a so-called e-democracy. The term e-democracy refers to the usage of information and communication technology in the democratic processes. ICT, electronic information and communication technologies, such as email, the internet, and cell phones, are creating many new possibilities for communication between government and the citizenry. My e-version can be divided into two categories. First is the electronic voting, and the second is electronic participation, using the internet and related technologies to facilitate the engagement of citizens in consultation and community planning. The second category of my electronic participation can be divided into three types of participation. Citizens are informed of political occurrences, citizens participate in polls, and online deliberation and discussion by email and chat boxes take place. The goal of my electronic form is to increase social inclusion in political processes. However, is that what really happens in reality? E-participation depends on a country's democratic traditions. Such differences in traditions have important implications for the way in which proposals of my E-type development are conceived and received. In Switzerland, for example, the development of e-democracy seems to fit Swiss tradition perfectly. In other countries, however, the same idea may be regarded as potentially disruptive. The Danish Ministry of IT and Research stated that online voting and opinion polls on the internet conflict with a number of fundamental features of Danish democracy. In addition, as mentioned before, the goal of e-democracy is to increase social inclusion in political processes. That includes participation of marginalized groups in society. In reality, there are several challenges to marginalized people when it comes to participation in my electronic type. First, my programs can be biased against marginalized groups of people by using algorithms. For example, women might be suggested different topics than men. Another way in which exclusion happens is due to the lack of access to my technology. Finally, there is a matter of language. Immigrants might not speak the native language of a country, and by that they could be excluded from the whole process. Furthermore, many of those who express themselves online are either partisan or deliberately provocative, as reflected in often inflammatory postings on anonymous internet trolls. The result is to skew the direction taken by debates, and we can never be sure who's behind the opinions posted. Lastly, the use of internet has led to heightened concerns about privacy, perhaps feeding into the kind of mistrust of government that has led to reduced support for conventional forms of participation. It seems like, whether direct or indirect, life is out to get me, and I can never escape the challenges which will forever face me. People ask whether I am the best form of governance. As it stands, I seem to have outpaced all my competitors. Many in the West hail a new age of freedom, and a consensus has formed that I've won the battle of ideas. However, this consensus is increasingly fragile. Brexit and the election of Donald Trump have arguably exposed my rather chaotic nature, and some argue that people power is simply tyranny of the majority. Not to be cocky, but I have to admit that I'm arguably the best form of government in terms of guaranteeing the rights and freedoms of the majority. This is proven by the fact that I've spread so rapidly, as I'm the most viable tool for combating tyranny and asserting the rights of many, because elections, referendums, and public meetings force the powerful to heed their wishes. Other forms of government tend towards exploitation of many by the elite. This is because without the vote, citizens have no means of redress, so the actions of government go unchallenged, and that allows them to abuse their power. On the other hand, some argue that I merely result in the tyranny of the majority, as minorities are afforded little power in democratic institutions that award representation quantitatively. Decisions are, they argue, often made not according to the rule of justice and the rights of minor party, but by the superior force of an interested and overbearing majority. I must admit that this is a legitimate criticism. Many democracies have a record of sidelining ethnic, religious, and political minorities, from the struggle for African Americans' civil rights to the exploitation of indigenous communities in Australia. Democracy can certainly be ineffective in safeguarding the rights of the minority. However, I must insist that I take different forms, some good, others not so good. There is no one form of me. On the bright side, there are consensual democracies which are characterized by a conscious effort to include minorities in the decision-making process. Such countries elect legislature through systems of proportional representation, where one party cannot easily exercise power on its own, as all majority groups are represented. The possible chaos that might arise from the people making bad choices has led to some to contend that other forms of government are more stable and efficient, as a single leader or governing elite is often better educated, more informed, and less capricious than the population at large. For example, current critics of democracy point to China's economic growth and political stability, arguing that its success shows the merits of an autocratic system, as positive decisions seem to have been made by an unelected elite, the Chinese Communist Party. However, I insist there are variations of democracy that create a compromise between democratic control and stability. Systems that employ the trustee model of representation strike a functional balance. Citizens are entitled to elect representatives, but the said representatives are obliged to exercise their own judgment, in theory blocking democratic decisions that would prove detrimental to the society. Furthermore, possible chaos that I might cause can arguably be mitigated through a well-educated citizenry. Education is considered to give the population more of a stake in maintaining a democratic society and a better understanding of the value of elected institutions. Considering the differing forms that I take today, one cannot simply conclude that I end in chaos. I believe that freedom democracy affords is justified. Furthermore, autocracy is not necessarily any more stable. China's history under the unchallenged leadership of Mao Zedong and CCP is checkered with disaster and chaos. Throughout my long life, I believe that I've proven to be the best form of government in providing freedom to the majority. While I can result in exclusion of minorities, many countries that adopt me adopt a consensual approach, allowing minorities to participate equally in the government. I may indeed be chaotic, but this too can be mitigated if representatives have the bravery to exercise judgment and the citizenry is well educated. On balance, if freedom and civil rights are considered a priority, it's difficult to argue that any form of government is superior to me. Right. Enough about me, though. I would now like to introduce you to my cousin, the rule of law. Despite what you might have read or heard, while me and rule of law are closely related, we're completely different, independent individuals. Over to you, rule of law.
Hi guys, I was born in ancient Greece. However, my functions changed quite a bit since then. Back in 300 before Christ, my job was practically limited to the idea that the law could act as the most efficient and legitimate barrier against the discriminatory and arbitrary power of the ruler. Over the next several decades, a multitude of world leaders broke my heart by constantly breaking me or manipulating me to please their own legal system. But after World War II, I finally had enough, and discussions about me began anew. And now I am proud to admit that nowadays I have been conceptualized and implemented in the context of domestic legal systems characterized by a high degree of centralization, institutionalization, and hierarchization. I hope you're finally proud of me, Mother. If you want to be my friend, there are a few things you need to know about me. I live by a set of safeguards, known as formal legality, which ensure that a legal system can perform its function of guiding people's conduct. As some famous guy once said, the rule of law is designed to minimize the danger created by the law itself. If you're a lawmaker, not interested in world domination, here are the principles of formal legality to ensure that I am respected. 1. Law should be prospective, open and clear. They apply from the moment of adoption and not retroactively. 2. Law should be relatively stable. Don't change them too often. I can barely keep up with my studies as it is. 3. The making of legal rules should also be guided by clear, open and stable rules. 4. The independent judiciary should be guaranteed. 5. The court should be easily accessible. 6. Law should not be clearly unfair or unjust. And lastly, 7. The discretion of officials should not be allowed to pervert the law. If you think you can satisfy all these conditions, please hit me up on Insta. I am single, ladies.